Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your host, and joining me today on What Works Wednesday is financial advisor David Edmisten. And David, really excited to have you here on the show because you made in your career a major transition. And we want to talk a little bit about that, talk about how you were able to at least partially implement some concepts of the Perfect RIA inside of a very compliance-heavy environment. So with that, David, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. I'm glad to be here. I'm a huge fan and a regular listener to the Perfect RIA. I've been able to implement a lot of what you guys talk about and just happy to share my experience today. So thank you so much for having me.
That's awesome. Well, tell us where you're at right now, and then we'll kind of rewind the clock backwards a little bit.
Sure. So I run Next Phase Financial Planning. We're an independent RIA in Prescott, Arizona. Launched my firm 5 months ago, almost to the letter. So just really new into the RIA space. I was with a major brokerage firm before that as an employee advisor, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But building up my client base, just put out my first 1099 letter this week. So that's been fun. But yeah, we're marketing and growing right now.
I love it. Well, tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, about when you were as an employee financial advisor, because we have advisors that listen to the podcast across the whole spectrum. Originally, by the way, David and Mike and I kicked off the podcast. We thought it would only be RAs, thus the name, but we have a big contingent of Edward Jones listeners, of LPL W2 people, Fidelity, Merrill, the whole spectrum. But you were already trying to implement some Perfect RA things before you formed your own RA.
Yeah, so I've been in the business for 16 years. So I've been an employee advisor at Wells Fargo, Bank of America, most recently with Schwab. And so in that environment, I actually got turned on to your setup for your business during your first podcast on the Kittis platform. Then heard Micah's story, heard your second one, and found the Perfect RIA. And so, when I heard what you were doing with your business, I was super inspired. I've got 8 kids, we homeschool, and so time is one of those big challenges. So I said, okay, here's a guy that's taken all this time out of the office. That sounds awesome. I'm an employee advisor. We're supposed to be in the office, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Yeah.
But I said, if you're doing things at work, let me see what you guys are talking about. And as I became a regular listener, I said, okay, this sounds fantastic. 6 months out of the office, great time with family, really wired practice. So let me see if these guys are legit. And so I just took the things you and Micah were sharing and said, let me just try one at a time. So a couple of podcasts on the calendaring software, going the emails that are worthless between clients. Can you do Tuesday? Can you do Thursday? Right. Oh, yeah. And so calendaring software, our firm didn't really have it as a standard practice, but I dug in and reached out to a colleague, found out we had the capability in our CRM, started using that. Next thing I know, I'm cutting down on my emails. Meetings are popping up on my calendar like, oh, Susie booked, Thursday and Dave booked on Friday. And so one tool that you guys had suggested, I'm like, man, this is working. My calendar is much more controlled and appointments are just showing up. So then I just took the next thing. I got the time blocking series that you guys have and looked at time blocking, and I'm like, okay, we get to be so reactive sometimes in the employee advisor world, or we have things that don't make sense, like we meet with a client on the year of when we enrolled them, right? Like why then? Why not some other time? And so I said, okay, let me use a time blocking method. What can I do with that? Well, I don't like working on Fridays. I don't like meeting with clients there. Mm-hmm. So inevitably, I'd book meetings with clients on Fridays. My wife, Christy, would call and say, hey, can we get away this weekend? No, I got a meeting. And so all this stuff of the life outside of the office is getting pushed back. So I said, what if I just don't book meetings on Fridays with clients? And I started doing that. And I use the calendars to open up appointments every other place. And next thing you know, Fridays are open. So now I can do financial plans and get ahead on that. Now I can do prospecting if it's needed, or research or whatever, right? And so my meeting quality is going up because I'm using the tools to have dedicated time not to meet with clients. My calendar's filling up with appointments. I'm still in the office on Fridays, but since I don't have meetings, if something comes up, I have a lot more flexibility to make adjustments. And so it's just been really cool to see the things that you guys share, that if you just take the time to put them into action, you can actually have a lot more control over how your business runs and how your personal life goes by implementing those ideas.
Wow, I love that. Boy, so many things stand out to me on this, David. Often, in fact, I was recently speaking, I do at a big broker dealer, and several advisors came up to me and they said, hey, listen, I can't do surge because compliance won't allow it. And I said, that doesn't make sense. They literally said you can't group your client meetings together. They said, well, no, they did. Well, it turns out what it was is they didn't have Calendly approved, but they had a different software. And so the reason I highlighted is that you mentioned that, right? You were, as an employee model, right? They have very restrictive things on what you can and can't do, but you kept working, saying, hey, there's got to be a way to do that. And I just really want to highlight that mindset of, am I looking for what I can't do, or am I looking for a way to get it done?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the challenge is, when I heard what you and Micah were sharing, I'm like, let's see if this is legit. Let's try it.
Yeah.
And then let's just go as far as we can go within the model that I'm in, right? So before I launched my RIA, I kind of dreamed of someday having that. But even within that model, calendaring software works, right? We found a way to make it work. Time blocking starting to work. Even like timing of meetings. Like for me, I need to have a cup of coffee and really have my brain awake. So I don't want to meet with anybody before 10 a.m. That's just what works for me. And then 10 to 1 is like my power hour. So I just said to myself, why don't I just not schedule meetings before 10 o'clock? I'll use the morning time to get integrated, wake up, do whatever else, and see if I can fill my calendar with meetings at the time that works best for me. And this isn't something, my branch manager or anybody in our firm was saying like, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. It's just meet with enough clients, meet with more clients to do the work. But I started saying, how much of this can I implement where I am, even if I'm not at the point where I'm running my own show? And so, that worked. Surge is actually funny that you brought that up because, again, the cycle we would get into is like, when do we meet with a client? Well, when it's been X number of days since our last meeting. Yeah. Totally illogical, right? It's just, it's an easy way to count 6 months, 9 months, quarter, year, whatever. And so the firm I was last with had a sabbatical program. So after you're there for a certain number of years, you get a month paid sabbatical, fabulous benefit. We decided to travel out of the country, spend a month in Nicaragua. Wow. And yeah, it was fantastic. You should go if you haven't been. But part of what I worked at is like, okay, let me apply the surge principles to this break in the office. It's not a full surge. I'm not doing yearly meetings. But I said, I've got February, I'm going to be out of the office. I normally have X number of clients that we always meet in February because it's the 6 or 12 month anniversary, right? So I just, in November, December, started planning for this trip. And I said, okay, how am I going to manage my clients while I'm gone for a month? Well, let's take everybody that meets in February. Let's see, and just send out an email early December. We normally meet in February. I'm going to be gone. Can we do it January, or are you okay if we push it back to March? Every single client. Oh yeah, fine. Glad you're going on a trip. Sounds like fun. Shoot me pictures when you get back. Everybody's in January. Everybody's in March. Now here's a whole month out of the office. I got more meetings in January because we're communicating effectively with our clients. So we're able to do the reviews, catch up on what's needed, get everybody ready for tax season, whatever we're doing. The people that didn't have urgent issues, no, I'm fine pushing it back to March. Now my March calendar, when I walk back in the office from this month break, is full because I took the time to communicate appropriately with the clients and set that schedule. No pushback at all. And then that kind of clicked a light bulb for me. Like, I just took a month out of the office. Like, I've never done that in my entire career. Thank goodness for my employer offering that benefit. But that was one of the spurs to get me to move eventually to open my own firm is, can I do that 2 months? Can I do it 3? Can I get to 6? Can I catch up with where you guys are at? So, again, it's just doing what works, but within whatever constraints you're in, like pushing it as far as you can. And, for me, it's been wonderful, but my clients got so much better experience. And that's what's been the kind of the proof in the pudding for me is, I could sit there and say, great, I got this time off. I managed a calendar for Dave. But what I found is my clients really appreciated the communication. They loved calendaring at their schedule. They could talk to their wife, look at their calendar, just book it. And the month off, like nothing got missed. In fact, we're doing better work because we're planning ahead for it and dedicating time to prep for it. So, if you have advisors that are where I was or that are pushing back on surge, do a little bit, do a little surge and see if it works and see if you see the benefits. I certainly did.
Now, David, when you were making these changes, right, moving away from Fridays, so you talk about moving away from Fridays, moving away from those early morning time spots, but you were still in a month's period of time or in a calendar quarter, if we're using your February example, you were still seeing the same number of clients, right? It wasn't as though you were just saying, hey, listen, I was seeing 4 a day, 5 days a week, now I'm just not going to see clients, right? I mean, you were still seeing all the same people, albeit in a much more structured format.
I actually think I saw more people because we were able. Yeah, it's so funny how that works because when you start being intentional with how you're communicating to clients about the times and look, this is when we meet. The Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are my meetings. Everything's open for client meetings. I got all the other work done Mondays and Fridays, right? So I found it to be beneficial for more meetings because we're communicating further in advance. We're setting the expectation with the clients that, look, we have meetings. Your meeting's important. We want to be well prepared. Here's the time we can do it. And, the only rub in the employee advisor is if you have like the broker the day of the walk-in traffic, right? Like if you're in that environment, you got to be ready with the catcher's mitt to a certain extent, right? But I actually got more meetings because they were structured instead of like, oh, Joe wants to meet on Tuesday. Okay, I'll stop everything and meet with him. And
two meetings that day, and then it's interrupted, and I can't get any flow going.
Exactly. And when you get in that groove of a meeting and a meeting and a meeting, you're constantly in engagement mode. You're engaging with clients, your communication's better, they're getting more value. And at the same time, you're managing your schedule and your time so much more effectively that you get to the end of the day and it's like, wait, I had more meetings this week and I'm done on Thursday and Friday's open. Like, it's really amazing the power of being intentional and using the things that you guys talk about. I think we had better quality meetings, more total meetings with clients, and better prep work, and a happier me, which is great.
It's interesting to me, the longer I'm an advisor and the more advisors I work with, these seemingly little things that make such a difference in the client experience. So again, we could think and say, well, I'm still meeting with a client the same number of times each year, and I'm still having the same number of meetings each calendar quarter. How could this possibly be different? But David, to your point, it was night and day different. And I think if only because a client knows intuitively that you're being proactive, right? It's one thing to say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, I know you wouldn't say this, but hey, it's been 97 days and we need you to come in. Even if you're not going to use those words, the client gets that. The client gets like, hey, listen, you're feeling kind of obligated. Like, I haven't been into my dentist for a cleaning in 6 months, so they're just sort of calling me. But if they're being proactive, David, when you're being proactive and saying, hey, we want to see you in January for these reasons, and here's my calendar, so that and you even mentioned it, you kind of said it offhandedly, but so that when you're with your spouse and you have your calendar handy, you can just click on the link. We're not going to email back and forth. We're not going to call back and forth. These things that seem small, I'm telling you, again, I've been into hundreds of practices, maybe thousands of practices, and these little things are what makes all the difference.
No, it's true. And it even forces me to think more thoroughly about meeting agendas and planning, right? Because if I'm like, okay, I'm not just it's Monday, who's on the roll call this week.
Yeah, we're going to shoot the breeze today. What did the market do last week?
Exactly. When I'm thinking 2 months ahead to say, okay, who do I need to meet with in the next 4 weeks? What do we need to tackle? Why is this important? Then that puts the onus on me as the advisor to do all the work ahead of time and do the case prep, as you call it, right? So, and send an agenda and give a little bit of time for the client to respond with some curveballs. The fascinating thing about that is the meetings, there's less surprises. The clients know what's coming. They're more engaged. Any of the stuff that catches you off guard of hey, I stepped in a meeting and a client brought up something totally out of left field. Well, by communicating the calendar ahead of time and the agenda ahead of time, I've got a week and a half before I meet with a client where they say, oh yeah, you know what, when else we meet, I also want to talk about my brother's inheritance. Okay, great. Now I've got a week and a half to be prepared for that. So, I think for everybody, it's just such a win-win. And I think when I was a listener before trying some of this stuff out, I think a lot of us in the industry can get caught into doing things the way we always have, or the way the person in the next office does, or the way that the company training is telling you to do. And it was just an experiment, honestly, to say, what can I try? What can I do? It doesn't work. If it hadn't worked, I would have just been like, my podcast subscription is over, right? But instead, it's working, and there's so much that you can do, and it ties it back to mindset. What it's been encouraging for me is to say, okay, there's practices that work. There's things you can implement, and now it starts changing your mindset. Instead of I can only do or I can't do because of compliance or because of my firm or whatever. It's like, how much further can I do to get it to the way I want it to look? And I think that's really powerful for anybody in our industry is when they take ownership of, you can make this what you want. You've just got to start.
I love that. Not to get too deep into the weeds, but how did your surge week look? So you weren't doing client meetings on Mondays and Wednesdays, and you weren't doing your first meeting until 10 o'clock?
Yes, so I structured it Mondays and Fridays, no client meetings. Perfect. That was all planning, prospecting, outbound calls, whatever. So meetings were Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I typically take my meetings back to back, about an hour each, from 10 to 1, take lunch at 1 to 2, and then if needed, another meeting, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. No meetings after 4, because I need that last hour of the day to, type in notes, wrap up, get my head clear, prep for the next day, get home and see the kids. So, if you do that, that's what, 5, 10, 11, 12, 5 meetings a day, 3 days a week. So 15 clients a week. That's totally manageable, and you can get it through practice of a few hundred clients in just a few weeks.
I love the, I nerd out on these little logistics things, right? Sure. Saying, hey, listen, the mornings are not my best time for meetings. Because sometimes we get caught as advisors saying, well, I should. Micah does 8 meetings a day, therefore I should do 8 meetings a day. I never do 8 meetings a day. It just doesn't work in my mind. It doesn't work in my stamina. So it's about, and I loved how you said, let me just be intentional. I don't do my best work in the morning, at least not client-facing work, so let me adjust my calendar accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think you have to know yourself and know what works for you. I know for me, like that cup of coffee has to have been processed through. My brain has to have focused on something else before I'm ready to talk intelligently to a client. And that's just what works for me. Micah's up at, doing however many meetings he does it first thing in the morning. But I think, giving yourself permission to do what works best, because if you're doing your best, your clients are getting your best, right? If you're saying like, I should meet with somebody right when the door opens, when I walk in the office, because X client expects to be serviced at that time in the morning, you're doing yourself a disservice, and most of your clients will actually respond well to your direction, and also knowing they're getting their best from you. If you leave a client blown away in a meeting on how you served them, they're not going to worry about what time the meeting was. They're going to be happy that you had a great meeting. Even like the Friday thing, I had one client that was like really adamant. We always met on Fridays. I said, I'm not meeting Fridays. Here's my calendar. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, can you open I only meet Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He pushed back a couple of times on it. And then next thing I see the calendar link that's like, okay, he's coming in Wednesday on his lunch break, right? And we had a great meeting and, served him better than we had in the past. So, I think we I guess head trash, right? We think that clients are going to like revolt if we change our meeting schedule, or if we revolt if we're not there till, late in the evening, early in the morning. Most clients just want great service, and they'll, if you can deliver that, that's what they're looking for.
Totally. I love that example. I think whenever we draw a line in the sand, that line is going to be tested, right? And whether you feel that that's the universe or fate or God or whatever, somebody, whatever is out there in the world, when you say, hey, I'm not going to meet with clients on Friday because that's not how I do my best work, the next day that client is going to call, right? And you need to just be prepared for that. Like, okay, if this is my line in the sand, whether it's minimums or surge or value adds, when somebody pushes back on that, how will I respond? And I love the simplicity of, hey, listen, I just don't meet with clients on Fridays anymore. David, I always use my kids as the excuse. Hey, listen, I need to have more time with my kids. Therefore, I'm not taking meetings after 4 p.m. I'm not working on Fridays. Because the kind of person that would argue with that, it's real clear to me that's not the kind of person I want as a client, right? The kind of person that would say, hey, David, you shouldn't take your family to Nicaragua for a month. That's not the person I want to have as a client.
Yeah, and I think you have to be sensitive, right? So you've got clients you're serving, and so always what's in it for them, what's the value to them. Taking that month off is the best thing I ever did in my entire career, because it forced me to get better at all the meetings leading up to that, and that's also what prompted me to launch my own firm. Is just the next level of within an employee advisor model, like I can manage my calendar. I can save up all my PTO. I'm never going to get 6 months out of the office, right? So it's been really cool as I've started my own firm now to like surge and calendar meetings and this process. That's how I started my firm. I advertise it like Mr. and Mrs. Client. When you work with us, you're going to have a spring planning meeting and a fall planning meeting, where those are our main meetings, and we're going to communicate quarterly. But this is when we meet. This is what we cover. So taking that again one step further is you have even more ownership and more control over how you design your practice on your own. But all the same principles apply. And, for anybody who hasn't tried it, like the productivity exponential, the satisfaction with hey, Fridays are off. My wife calls, can we go see grandma this weekend? Yes, I don't have any meetings. So all these things, both personally and professionally, just get better and better and better.
I want to highlight one thing, David, that you mentioned that I think sometimes gets missed, and that is, so even though you were not seeing clients on Fridays, and some Fridays you weren't even working at all, those other days you were working really hard. It wasn't as though you went from 5 days worth of effort to 4 days worth of effort. I mean, you basically took 5 days worth of effort and crammed it into 4 days or crammed it into 3. And the reason I want to highlight that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes I meet advisors and they say, Jarvis, great news. I have the exact same practice as you do. I never go into the office. That's not the practice I have. The practice I have, and David, that you had too, is you cram as much as you possibly can into the time that you're there. And if I'm not cramming things together, then I'm not going to be there. Or in this case, I'm not going to do meetings.
And it's just a matter of shifting how you're doing all the same activities. It's just organizing it better, right? The typical employee advisor, the role I was in, it was like somebody calls, they need a financial plan. Okay, I'll start on the financial plan. Somebody else calls, I need distribution. Okay, I'll stop and do that. And you stop and do these things as they come. On the Fridays that I was off, I was doing all my financial plans for the meetings 2 weeks ahead of time. So I'm going financial plan. I'm getting prepped actually farther in advance with better answers for my clients. Some Fridays I worked harder than I did meeting with clients on Thursdays, right? If I'm honest about it.
Yeah.
But it's just being intentional with, I'm going to do certain things at certain times that benefit my client, that benefit me, and being smarter about how you organize that time. And anybody can do that. It's just a matter of learning and being intentional about it.
Yeah. Well, and I love, and the reason I wanted to have it on the show, I love highlighting it from that employee advisor space. Obviously, you're now in the promised land, independent RIA.
Right.
This is great, but I just want to highlight because it wasn't as if the company would have said, "Oh, David, it's no problem if you want to see a 30-minute clients, or if you don't want to make phone calls, that's not a big deal." Like obviously, they're watching those measurements very, very closely. I think there's a lot of proof in the pudding there.
Yeah, even like marketing and prospecting, right? Like a typical employee advisor, you're measured on activity in a lot of cases, and activity always leads to results. But by blocking prospecting time, right now my prospecting is better. I'm doing more of it because I'm not interrupting prospecting to respond to a client question or try to meet with somebody who said they can only meet at this fire drill. We got to meet this day at this time because that's the only day I have off. Like everything gets better and more productive because you're focusing on it. You're doing that deep work at a specific time for specific things. I mean, my results during that period shot up in every single metric you can think of. Mm-hmm. And, so I'm just really thankful for you guys for sharing the knowledge, because without it, like I might still be sitting in that chair, reactively running my practice instead of proactively running it.
Well, and I love how you highlight that this was a win for all of the stakeholders involved, right? Obviously it was clearly a win for you and for your family. It was a win for your clients, for your prospective clients, for the firm. I've not seen a chime where Surge implemented correctly has anyone ended up worse off than they were. It's kind of easy to throw stones at it and say, hey, this is about doing the least amount of work possible and not being there for your clients. But that's really not it at all. As you discovered, you were actually there for your clients on a much higher level than before you implemented Surge.
Yeah, and I think, again, you have to know yourself and what you can implement. If I tried to implement Micah's Surge, like I wouldn't be happy, right? I mean, Surge is a concept and there's technique to it. But if 3 meetings a day is your Surge, as long as you're meeting with the right number of people and delivering value, or if it's 5, or if it's Mondays and Fridays off days and important to you, like whatever it looks like, it's the concept of doing a lot of great work and the same kind of work in time blocks that are dedicated to deliver, as you guys say, massive value, versus I'm going to do a little bit of this here and a little bit there. I'm going to allow myself to be distracted, and now I'm really not delivering value. And, you're emotionally and just time-wise, like you're more burnt out in that space. If you tried Surge and it overwhelmed you, my advice might be like try it again a little bit differently, right? Like don't throw out the whole concept, just like see what didn't work and refine it. So
yeah, I love it. I think it's a good transition, David, into action items. Of course, this podcast is all about taking action, but I think you hit it right there on the head. Try Surge, right? Try a version of Surge that resonates for you. So if you hear David's version of Surge and you say, wow, I would love to not have my first meeting until 10 o'clock. Cool, do that. If you hear Micah's version, you say, oh, my first meeting at 6 a.m., that sounds amazing. Cool, try that. David and I are both going to still be drinking our coffee, but knock yourself out. So find a version of Surge, or if you're already doing Surge, find someone who's doing it a little bit differently than you and say, boy, if I tried this on, how would it look?
Yeah, and I think, the other thing I would say, even broader in action items, is just try whatever resonates, right? I used to listen to you guys.
That's so true. Yeah.
I was listening to one of your podcasts. You're talking about the email, the back and forth. I'm literally at my desk, like with Dave going back and forth. Is Tuesday at 6:30 or, whatever the times are, right? And I'm like, how much of a waste of time is this for both of us? So let me just try the calendaring software. Well, it worked. Then I tried the next thing, time blocking. Then it worked. Then mini Surge. Then it worked. And now I'm running my own practice. First 1099 letter. Let's see how that goes. And I think you guys share so much good information. Like you don't have to adopt the entire thing at once. Just try one, see if it works, move forward. And for me, it's been really impactful. But I think if you hear all this and don't at least try one thing, you're really missing the boat. Yeah,
you really are. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being on the podcast. Congratulations again for coming over to the good side of the independent RIA space. For all our listeners, I think, David, you hit it right on the head, right? Find something that's working and just try it on. Say whether it's Surge meetings or calendar scheduling or email or the 1099 letter, all those things, find something that works and make it work in your practice. So, David, again, thank you so much for your time. And for all our listeners, until next time, happy planning.